Okay, welcome to another episode of Dimwits, Dipshots, Dufuses, and Dullards. And yeah, we've had quite a week yet again. This time we're going to be looking at Pete Hegseth, or Hogsbreath if you want to be juvenile, and how he is actually caving to Vladimir Putin predictably. And, he's the U.S. Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth is. He's been attempting to refute claims that the United States is betraying Ukraine by initiating peace talks with Russia without Kyiv's direct involvement. After discussions with both Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Zelenskyy, former president, well, active president, I keep wanting to call him former president, but active president Donald Trump announced plans to meet Putin in person, possibly in Saudi Arabia, almost as if it's, an axis of evil that they're trying to establish here. But he floated the idea that it'll possibly happen in Saudi Arabia, which, of course, is a brutal dictatorship in which the citizens barely have any rights. But anyway, that's the sort of delightful place they'll go to negotiate a supposed end to the ongoing conflict. This move has raised concerns from European leaders and, of course, others who emphasize that any peace negotiations must include both Ukraine and Europe. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius, which is kind of a catchy name. But anyway, he highlighted the necessity of European participation, stating that Europe will have to live directly with the consequences of any agreement. It's sort of their well, I guess territory would be one way to look at it, because Europe kind of views itself as sort of a collective entity, if you will. So, from my perspective, the principles of self determination are paramount here. I have historically, meaning throughout the history of my life, since I became at all interested in social issues, I've supported the rights of oppressed nations to determine their own futures, free from external coercion, I mean, to the extent that it's possible. In the context of the Ukraine conflict, this translates to supporting Ukraine's autonomy in peace negotiations and opposing any form of imperialism that undermines this autonomy. Ironically, despite the far right claiming they represent law and order and security and all that fun stuff, actually, some anarchist groups within Ukraine, such as the Resistance Committee, have actually actively participated in the defense against Russian aggression. Of course, you don't hear about that in the Western press all that much, because guess what? They don't want to paint, anarchist groups in any positive light at all. It's a curious thing about history that if you're in a certain type of group, no one can ever say anything positive about you. You know, that's how it goes for these anarchist groups. But anyway, they view the invasion as a manifestation of imperialist policies and emphasize the importance of grassroots organization and self-defense. Their involvement underscores a commitment to resisting authoritarianism and supporting the self-determination of the Ukrainian people. So it's almost as if, there's a commonality here that isn't as much about ideology as it is, about just resisting authoritarianism, and its overt militaristic approach to governing people's affairs and micromanaging their personal lives and all that kind of stuff, which of course we've seen in Russia and we're increasingly seeing within the United States, somehow under the banner of freedom. But the exclusion of Ukraine from its own peace negotiations is seen by many as a form of external domination, which I vehemently oppose as well. The principle is that no decisions about a nation should be made without its participation. What a novel idea that people should have a say in what happens in their own country and, their own lives and stuff like that. What a fascinating and bizarre concept, I know. But anyway, that aligns with my critiques of top down approaches that disregard the agency of affected communities. The current US approach to peace talks with Russia, if you want to even call them peace talks, it's debatable what they actually are. But anyway, their approach, the US approach right now, sidelines Ukraine and Europe, and it's drawn significant criticism. From my standpoint, such actions should be viewed as undermining the self determination of the Ukrainian people and perpetuating imperialistic dynamics. I advocate for inclusive negotiations that respect the autonomy and voices of all affected parties, particularly those of Ukraine itself. So, all right, I've talked about Pete Hogsbreath a little bit here. This episode wasn't so much about him, or this segment of the episode, him being the quadruple D of the week. But, I did want to go over a little bit about how he's using his new job as U.S. Defense Secretary. And so, next segment, we're going to look at the peripheral poophead of the week, who is J.D. Vance. So, I know what some of you out there might be thinking, well, he's not really on the periphery that much, but you know what? I'm bending the rules here because, in a way, a vice president is always a little bit on the periphery of things. I know that when George W. Bush was president, Dick Cheney wasn't as much on the periphery. He was definitely somebody that people accused of actually running the country instead of George W. or Dumya, as some people called him. Um, but nevertheless, a lot of the time, when it comes to vice presidents, they're sort of seen as side characters or like they're on the sidelines and they don't get as much attention. So who is J.D. Vance? James David Vance, born James Donald Bowman on August 2nd, 1984. He's only, well, actually, he's younger than me. So, wow. But anyway, he was born in Middletown, Ohio. He's had a career as an author, attorney, venture capitalist, or vulture capitalist if you want, and a politician. So, of course, because he's had, a successful and a eventful life, that must mean he's qualified for a high political office, right? Well, not so fast, not so fast. I'm going to get into that a little bit more. It, it turns out that he sucks. But anyway, he gained national attention with his 2016 memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, which delved into the socioeconomic challenges of white working class families and was later adapted into a film in 2020. And Ron Howard, I'm looking at you, buddy. That was kind of a bad idea. I've heard it's not the worst movie of all time or whatever, but still. Ron, what were you thinking with that one? You kind of brought this guy who grew a beard to look more manly and tough into the, further into the national spotlight. So maybe Ron Howard didn't quite know what he was getting into there, but still, eh. But Vance's political journey saw him representing Ohio and the U.S. Senate from 2023 to 2025 before ascending to the role of the 50th Vice President of the United States under President Donald Trump in 2025. And I don't know if you can call it ascending at this point. It's more like he's descending, like down the toilet with the rest of the country. But Vance's early life was marked by instability. Famously, like he's marketed his life as being unstable. His parents divorced when he was a toddler, and he was primarily raised by his maternal grandparents due to his mother's struggles with drug addiction. After high school, he served as a military journalist in the U.S. Marine Corps from 2003 to 2007, including a 6-month deployment to Iraq in 2005. He later earned a bachelor's degree from Ohio State University in 2009 and a law degree from or not high school, Yale Law School in 2013. That was my mistake. You can call me a dummy for almost calling Yale Law School Yale High School. But anyway, following a brief stint in corporate law, Vance transitioned into the tech industry as a venture capitalist, and you might say he's transitioning into lawlessness as well, because that's increasingly what his political party is, just a bunch of random stupidity and lawlessness. But anyway, he was initially a critic of Donald Trump, even referring to him as possibly America's Hitler. During the 2016 presidential election, Vance's stance shifted by the 2022 U.S. Senate election in Ohio. He had become a staunch supporter of Trump and all things stupid, securing the Senate seat by defeating Democratic nominee Tim Ryan. And, I kind of have to give a boo to Tim Ryan for losing. I don't know what exactly led to that loss, but I suppose Ohio is a bit of a red state, but still, too bad he didn't do better, I assume there weren't enough resources put into that particular race. But anyway, in July 2024, Trump selected Vance as his running mate for the presidential campaign, where Vance joined in on agreeing that, the Haitian immigrants were eating cats and dogs, which was a white nationalist talking point and obviously untrue. And, I guess the rest is history. That was still not enough to sink the campaign. But upon assuming the vice presidency in January 2025, Vance became the third youngest individual to hold the office and the first millennial to do so. Third youngest, possibly one of the dumbest. Now, I know people out there are like, oh, he's actually a smart guy, but no. I want to normalize calling people dumb if they advance the cause of stupidity and evil. Like, just because you're cynical and you manipulate people by taking advantage of others' stupidity, it should be seen as being kind of stupid yourself because you're not advancing the rest of the world, and you're taking advantage of them for personal gain. So I want to normalize calling that entire thing stupidity. Like let's get on that. Let's make that more of a thing. Enough with this saying, oh, somebody who can cynically and skillfully manipulate people, he is highly intelligent or she is highly intelligent or whatever. No, let's just call it stupidity. Let's lump them in with the rest of the dullards that they're cynically taking advantage of. That's what I want to normalize. So can we get on that, please? Anyway, politically, now this is where the even greater incompetence and hypocrisy starts to take shape, and you really start to see how, yeah, this guy's full of crap. But anyway, politically, Vance identifies with national conservatism and right wing populism, describing himself as part of the post liberal right. So what does that mean? Well, post liberal just means you don't want equality in society. That's because that's really what a lot of liberalism actually means. His positions include opposition to abortion, same-sex marriage and gun control. So yeah, there you have it. Um, it's ironic that he's against abortion so much and against divorce, as I'll get into more, because his home life was so unstable. It would actually be a solid argument that not everybody should have children, you know? And for same sex marriage, his life is evidence that, maybe same sex couples should be able to adopt, in the grander sense that, so long as a household is relatively stable, they should be able to adopt children who come from, homes that do have violence or abuse or incompetent parents or whatever. And of course, the gun control thing, that's a debate for a different time. I could bring it up more in this episode, but I'm not going to get so much into that. But anyway, Vance has been vocal against so-called woke ideology, which again just means some social equality. But he's asserted that major institutions have been united against conservative values. Ooh, how scary. You mean like the idea that different types of people exist and, they're entitled to some basic rights and protections under the law? Oh, what a scary idea. But anyway, in a 2021 speech, he emphasized the need for conservatism to act as a counter revolutionary force against liberal elite culture, advocating for a de-wokeification program. Boy, they sure love to throw around the word woke, don't they? Like it actually, you know, means they're correct about anything. I'm just going to repeat this word over and over again, because it's all I've got. But anyway, he compared to he compared de-wokeification to, he said it's akin to historical efforts to eradicate totalitarian ideologies, which is ironic because he has a totalitarian ideology. And that's exactly what so-called de-wokeification would entail. It would be a totalitarian ideology being imposed on the population by force of law. And Vance's views on gender and family have also drawn attention. He's criticized modern feminism and gender equality, suggesting that childless individuals, well, especially childless women, in leadership positions contribute to societal issues. Well, that's interesting because, somebody being childless actually means they literally have fewer societal issues that they present because they've brought less people into the world. Therefore, they have made less societal issues by definition. So it's a bit of a dumb thing to say on his part, but whatever. People seem to think he's smart. But in discussions, he has named figures like Kamala Harris and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as examples of leaders whose lack of children supposedly lead them to promote policies that make others miserable. Oh man, what a smart take. Well, of course, there's nothing about their policies that are guaranteed to make others miserable as far as like them having no children of their own. Like he has no evidence of that. There wouldn't be any evidence of that because there's no way to prove that if you don't have children you're out to make others miserable. Like that's not really a thing because most people who have children, they don't necessarily make people's lives not miserable. You know, they're they're not necessarily out there improving everything they touch. And in contrast, somebody who does not have their own children isn't like some cackling villain crafting policies or whatever, you know, engaging in behaviors that make everybody else miserable. Like that's not how that goes. Plenty of people who have children, contribute misery to the world. In fact, again, J.D. Vance's own childhood, according to him, demonstrates that parents themselves can make their own children's lives miserable. So what the fuck, JD? You're a dummy. You're dumb. Anyway, from my perspective, Vance's advocacy for government-driven moral guidance, and his alignment with post-liberal thought raises concerns about the expansion of state power into personal lives. Things that so-called libertarians ought to be wondering about, and small government conservatives should be like, why does he want to get into people's personal lives in the name of freedom? That doesn't really add up. His proposals, such as granting extra votes to parents of underage children, reflect a desire to reshape democratic participation in ways that could marginalize non-traditional family structures and individual autonomy. And it's also just a dumb idea. You shouldn't be granting extra votes to anybody. It should be one person, one vote. How about that idea? That's a pretty good idea. I mean, if you want elections at all. Some of these people, they don't want elections. And you know what? That's a debate that people can have. But I will say that none of these people who are in Vance's camp are going to replace representative democracy with anything better. So get that idea out of your head that they're going to improve anything, because they're going to only put something worse in place of whatever we have now. So, and things that are going to totally undermine individual autonomy and micromanage people's lives. Make it harder for women to get divorced. Not only will they ban gay marriage, but they'll probably outright ban or even exterminate LGBTQ people. I said pew. But anyway, they'll exterminate them if they can. Because this is a fascist movement, that's what they're going to move toward. I know right now the media isn't always picking up on that, but it's there. The evidence is there. Critics argue that Vance's portrayal as a working class populist is contradicted by his connections to tech giants and the fossil fuel industry, sectors known for environmental harm and economic inequality. Indeed, the economic inequality angle is all sort of wrapped up in this, because for whatever reason, these people want to make economic inequality great again, and that's primarily, what their focus is. They're elitists. They want to have the wealthy have all the power, all the say, and that's just all wrapped up together in a lot of the stuff that's happening now. Despite his anti-corporate rhetoric, his policy positions overwhelmingly favor the wealthy, including support for reducing corporate taxes and opposing progressive taxation reforms. And regarding taxation reforms and taxation abolishment, as I've said many, many times, these people are actually not tax abolitionists. They just believe in shifting the burden onto the poor. That's primarily what this is. Maybe on an individual level, a few of these people do actually at least say they're against taxation altogether. But for the most part, they just want to shift the tax burden and have a government that is by the rich and for the rich. So they're not actually, anarchists or whatever term you want to use. They just believe in taxation reforms that create a universal tax on all products that you buy on the store, a national sales tax, which is a way of shifting the burden onto the general population and getting rid of the more progressive tax system that would tax those with higher incomes. So J.D. Vance's trajectory from a memoirist highlighting the struggles of Appalachians to a political figure advocating for far right state centric policies illustrates, a contradiction between personal narrative and political ambition. That this is somebody who, at one point, was actually critical of some of the far right elements that he came to represent. So his positions, particularly when viewed, you know, through a sane lens, underscore tensions between individual freedom and government authority. All right, so on to the third segment of today's episode, the fetid fever dream flashback of the week. So for this one, we're going to look at David Frum and his deluge of dumb, disastrous propaganda from the George W. Bush era. So, how does he tie into this episode? Well, in 2010 through 2011, J.D. Vance wrote for David Frum's Frum Forum website under the name J.D. Hamill. So let's look at this Frum scum. David Frum, a Canadian American political commentator. So the guy's not even truly fully American. But anyway, he is a Canadian American political commentator, a speechwriter, and journalist, if you want to call him that. He's best known for coining the infamous phrase axis of evil in George W. Bush's 2002 State of the Union address. While he has been involved in various political controversies, he has not been at the center of any major personal scandals, probably because he's a boring motherfucker. But anyway, his most significant scandal could be his role in promoting a neoconservative agenda, particularly his advocacy for the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Remember that? Yeah, that was a disastrous thing. So, Frum's role in the Iraq War and the Axis of Evil speech is worth remembering, even though, people kind of forget that. Frum helped craft the rhetoric that justified the Iraq War, a conflict widely condemned for its devastating consequences, including mass civilian casualties, the destabilization of the Middle East, and the expansion of U.S. imperialism. His 2003 book, The Right Man, further defended Bush's foreign policy, reinforcing the narrative that military intervention was necessary. And of course, one of the ironies of that whole line of thought is that anybody could look at, the crimes of the United States or any other country and say, well, we need to stop them. Military intervention is necessary over there. Look at what they're up to. They're not doing the right thing. And what do you know? You have just as thorough of a rationalization for dropping bombs, against any other country, you want. You can even make up lies like David Frum did. And from my standpoint, especially one rooted in anti-imperialism and opposition to state violence, Frum's advocacy for war is a prime example of the destructive power of centralized state authority and why there definitely need to be some major checks on any such power. So how do I assess his actions? Well, for one, there's complicity in state violence. That's one of the obvious ones. By helping justify the war, Frum played a role in legitimizing a conflict that resulted in hundreds of thousands of additional deaths and widespread suffering. I say additional because remember, the atrocities against Iraq were ongoing. They started under George Herbert Walker Bush, and they went on under Clinton. In fact, there's an infamous interview with Madeleine Albright, the Secretary of State under Clinton, who said that the deaths of, I believe, like 500,000 Iraqi children due to the sanctions imposed on them, she said that the price was worth it in that interview. So Yeah, you want to talk about pro-life people? Well, there you go. Um, Large-scale deaths of children in Iraq, and people forget about that. But the renewed war effort was based on state deception, the infamous claims of WMDs, and it really demonstrates at times seemingly inherent dishonesty of governments in pursuing power. You also had neoconservatism emerging more as a sort of authoritarian ideology. Fromm's neoconservatism aligns with a belief in state power to impose quote unquote order through military force, which is a premise that I reject. His attacks on anti-war voices, such as labeling opponents of the war unpatriotic in National Review, illustrated disdain for dissent, a key element of authoritarianism. He's also been in favor of the expansion of state surveillance and control, which which is ironic because a lot of Republicans claim to be worried about such things, but they actually ultimately end up favoring control. So the post 9/11 policies from supported, like the Patriot Act and the so called War on Terror, led to mass surveillance, expanded policing, and further eroded civil liberties, things reasonable people view as tools of oppression. So, from my perspective, David Fromm's legacy is not about a personal scandal, but about his ideological commitment to state power, war, and yes, control. His rhetoric contributed to immense suffering, reinforcing legitimate critiques of government propaganda, militarism, and the ruling class's ability to manufacture consent for war. So, in other words, David Frum is another prick.